Hello, there is Impossible Creations, and this tutorial will cover motion settings for Ragdoll Animator 2. I will explain how you should work with them and show you some examples. Great, let's go. It's finally time to talk about the motion bookmark. And in order to explain all these parameters, I prepared a new model. This one have extra bonus chain which is trunk. Let's take a quick look on the colliders, on which we will apply some custom settings later. Okay, now motion, play mode, and take a look. And let's start with basics, so the Ragdoll blend, which you can use to easily fade off the Ragdoll Animator effect, like the component being disabled. And when character is during fallen pose, you can also use the blend to fade it. Now let's talk about the parameter I just used, so the animation mode. So as you saw, it's changing behavior of the whole physics of the body, and you can read tooltips for more insight. But you could notice that there is also sleep mode, which works in the same way like the falling mode, but it's also disabled in Ragdoll Animator when rigid bodies come down on the floor. And it's disabled in colliders, making rigid bodies kinematic. And when you take a look on Profiler, you will see that it completely optimized it. And when we turn it back on, you see engine using its rigid bodies again. Joint limits. We were talking about them in the first tutorial, and you should keep the default settings, so no limits during standing mode, because if you would use the limits all the time, the physical animation matching will be prevented from moving to right rotations. Unity solver iterations are physical iterations applied to the rigid bodies, and by default Unity is using about 6 iterations per rigid body, but they suggest using like 10 or 20 for the ragdolls to give a bit better precision. Okay, now the main topic. Muscle's power is controlling like the energy of the whole body, and basically it's multiplier for all these parameters there, so make it around 50%. And there you see spring value 1500 and damping 30. And when we go to some body of a ragdoll, and in a step drive you see these values. Damper is multiplied linearly, but the springs are exponentially, since it gives more responsive effect like the percent amount of the power. When we bring it back to 1 and check again, you see there's original value. So the spring value is controlling the strength of each body bone, which is used to rotate towards the desired pose. And when your character is heavier, so have more mass, you should set it higher. And damper is used to calm down the spring effect, because when spring is strong and damper is low, then it will just jiggle. The default settings are neutral, but when we set the spring power lower, it will react more lazy, but when we set the damper like 0, it starts going crazy, like there's no brake power to stop the spring. On the other hand, when we set it pretty high, like that, the motion is very sudden and like vibrating, and in such case we should set higher damper, so the effect looks like more correct. And also these parameters are chained with the parameters you see in a setup bookmark, and its connection mass multiply. It's parameter of configurable joints, which is making connected body parts being lighter, but only for the body structure. For the other world physics objects, the heaviness is still the same. So in short, it's keeping the physical pose with ease. You can play with it, like set it lower and then use less spring power, but beware from setting it too low, it can cause like jitter motion, like you see. When you bring it back to 1, you will see the whole body is really heavy now. And then you need to use more spring power. But I found it works really nice with standing mode when you set it like 0.5. You probably noticed the on-fall mode fields, because when you switch to fall mode, you really need to change a few settings to make the falling animation look right. Like if you play fall animation with damping, it will look a bit stiff. To make it fall more freely, you should set it 0 or pretty low. Yeah. Now hard matching. It's applying extra calculations to the rigid bodies, forcing them to rotate towards the desired animator pose. So if you compare the original animation with the Ragdoll animation motion, you see the differences, but when you turn on hard matching, the difference is almost noticeable. But character becomes more stiff by this. But you can lower the springs or increase the connection mass multiplier to reduce a bit the stiffness effect. And for the falling mode you don't want to use hard matching, but maybe in some cases you will like to use it, so there is always option for it. And one last thing for the hard matching, there is also feature which is called position hard matching, and it's forcing bones to not just rotate towards the desired animator pose, but also move. It's making character even more stiff. But to show you what it actually does, let me add sphere on a scene. And let's push the elephant. And there you should notice that the leg is trying to bend below the sphere. And without any hard matching it would look like this. So basic push. But hard matching is trying to match the animator position like you see here. And when we turn off position hard matching and use just rotation hard matching, the effect is also different. So it's worth to know how all these things works to prepare right settings for your use cases. But there is downside of using this hard matching and its performance. When you take a look on the debugger, you will see that when we set hard matching 0, so it's turned off, there is around 500 ticks. But when it's on, it jumps to 600. And with position hard matching, it gets even a bit more. But still, it's not so much if you really need these features. And now anchor bone attach. So anchor bone have dedicated control for its positioning in order to keep whole body in place. And you can set like anchor bone attach low to use less force to maintain its pose. But then it will follow animation less precisely. Then you can set it 1 and switch kinematic anchor on max. It will turn off physics reactions for it, but its animation will be perfectly matching. But as you can see, it will overlap with the colliders if it enters something. So for now let's turn it off. Auto unstack will teleport the hips if in some case it's pushed away from the source controller. Like you see there. Character should be there right now. Auto unstack will move it here. But in this case you can also use soft limit anchor extra feature, so you can trigger falling when the character is pushed away. Lock anchor rotation will prevent body to rotate when it's pushed by something, like you see here. So when it's on it's solid, when off everything rotates. And if you want to allow it to rotate just a bit, you can use the limit anchor, which will use settings in the construct physics of the hips. But also don't forget that all of this is Unity physics, so you can try many different things and find better solutions for animation like this. And what I will do right now will be using kinematic fit. So now each foot is forced to match the animator position, and rest of the body is reacting with this physics. And what is this magic feature there? It's getting leg chains from the construct, finding last bone and just switching it kinematic, and that's all. Everything else is handled by the Ragdoll animator. But using it with extra feature will handle switching off kinematic when character switch to falling mode. So I will remove it. And there's also similar extra feature which is called kinematic bones selector, which will help you switch in bones kinematic without need to entering the hierarchy. And there we can switch like hands to be kinematic, feet too. And there you see weird motion with the legs, and that's because the hands are pushing tight colliders without any resistance since they are kinematic. But I want to show you something else, and using kinematic hands for something like physical IK. And there I use the Ragdoll magnet point component, which I will explain in the future tutorials. But all what it does is forcing rigid body to move towards its position. And you can use it for different things, but as you can see you can also use it like for the IK target. What's more, with enabled the kinematic hands, animations like attacks will be not affected by the physics, so it will match the true hand position and rotation, and the rest of the body will react with physics. Okay, now the limbs bookmark. And there's actually not much to talk about, since there you have just basic multipliers for the force for each chain, and clicking on a name will switch to the physics settings. And the multiplier you see there is the same slider you see there. But since we are in a construct, let's switch to the trunk and let's modify its individual parameters a bit. And here I quickly switch unlimited rotations. But more correct would be using a bit bigger limits, enable use limits all the time, and apply to all bones in a chain. And for the connected mass I enabled override, so it will use this value instead the setup bookmark amount. And now extra settings for the trunk bones. And in order to make body part react more freely with physics, we should set damping pretty low. When it's 0, it's not overriding the value, but when we set 1 or 0.1, then bone's rigid body will use this value. So let's apply this physics settings for the rest bones in this chain. Let's lower the overall force for the trunk and let's disable hard matching for it. And now its physical behavior is more correct for this kind of bones chain. Yeah, now let's talk about the physics materials. You can find useful using sliding physical materials on the colliders during standing mode. And such material has parameters like this, so 0 friction and combined minimum. Thanks to that, the contacts with other colliders on a scene are more smooth. And then if you would use materials which are applying friction, the limbs can be stretched back because the friction is happening there. But for the falling mode, you don't want to apply the no friction material since it will react like it's fallen on the ice. But with friction material, it looks nice. Okay, now what you would notice is that when we switch in between the windows, there's happening something weird with the character. And that's because the Unity animator is getting cooled. If it's animated always, it's not happening. And we can fix it actually by turning on optimization. And we can do it with extra feature. Optimize. And there is option for distance-based cooling and mesh visibility-based cooling. So there we can add some mesh, and when bounding box of this mesh will be not visible in the camera, then the Ragdoll animator will turn off. So check it, switch window, and you can see in the inspector that it's changed. You can also watch the Ragdoll blend % value and the calculations cost. So character is not visible in the view, so calculations are turned off. Character gets visible, then it's blended in. You will also find extra feature for levels of detail, so you can reduce quality of the physics when character is far away. Alright, that's all for this tutorial. And the next ones we will focus on the extra features and some additional components included in the Ragdoll Animator 2 package. Yeah, I hope this video was helpful for you. Leave a like, subscribe for more. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.